Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. The post-Basho fugue is setting in, so before the fog gets too thick, let's make us a tier list recap. I'm gonna set this up a little differently than other recaps. I'll start with the guys who were either officially or very obviously hurt to get them out of the way, and then go through the wrestlers roughly in order of prediction accuracy. So, if you're here for the sweet smell of coping YouTuber, that'll be further along in the video. Also, we have actual official confirmation that Hoshoryu will be named the sport's 74th Yokozuna. However, for this recap, when I talk about Hoshoryu, it'll be about his wins and losses in this tournament, not his promotion. I'll make a separate video about the process of becoming Yokozuna and how that worked out for him when hardly anyone thought it would after that third loss. Alright, let's get started. Terunofuji. Not much to say about Terunofuji. He came into the Basho optimistic, only to have his body betray him for the last time. Now he's a coach, and considering how often he was complimented for helping his stablemates during his time as Yokozuna, I'm looking forward to seeing how his guys do now that pushing them to improve is his full-time job. Koto Sakura. Sumo wrestlers enter tournaments with unknown or unexpected injuries all the time, but it's hard to find someone more unexpectedly wounded than Koto Sakura. Even when training reports said Hoshoryu was beating him left, right, and sideways, there was no indication it was due to Koto being hurt. And in fact, he might not have been. Whether it's his old knee injury flaring up or his newly taped ankle, tape I barely noticed even after a commenter pointed it out, he was much more reminiscent of mid-2024 Takakeisho than anyone else. Until and unless a report on his health comes out, his readiness may be a mystery all the way until the March tournament starts. Mitakeyumi. Mid-rank Mitakeyumi tends to start strong and fade late, and that's exactly who he was in this Basho, except it only lasted 3 days. He had no juice, and the fact he got himself out there every day doesn't mean much, considering he did the same thing in November after getting carted off on a stretcher. I wouldn't lose all hope if I'm a Mitakeyumi fan. He should land at the bottom of Makuuchi, and even though that'll be tougher competition than if he was at the top of Juryo, it does give him more time to heal before he risks losing his salary. Recovery is possible, we just don't know how long it'll take. Kitanawaka. Ugh, not like this. Kitanawaka was doing Kitanawaka things, beating the lower end of the division before straight up breaking his ankle against Takeru Fuji. Now, instead of riding the yo-yo between Divisions 1 and 2 again, it's questionable at best whether he'll fight in March at all. If he doesn't, barring a miracle, he'll be in Makushita when we see him again. Roga and Hokuto Fuji. Hokuto Fuji didn't fight, and Roga probably shouldn't have tried. Both will fall to Juryo, and we'll see if either or both can benefit from the apparent springboard effect that's launched Kenbozan, Chiyoshoma, Endo, and Takara Fuji to unexpected levels of success over the past year. Now let's get into the guys who more or less functioned for 15 days. Onosato. A-tier prediction, 10-win finish. The only surprising loss, in retrospect, was day 1 to Tobizaru. Abi's becoming a boogeyman, and his other 3 losses were to the guys in the playoff. Rarely does anything in sumo happen exactly as we predict, but this was pretty close. Ura. C- prediction, 7-8 record. This is a pretty easy prediction for a good wrestler at this rank, but it felt like I damn near predicted his schedule. He was 4-4 after 8 days, picked up a 5th win against Koto Sakura, and then faced 4 more Sanyaku members in part due to Teru's exit and the Waka Bros not being able to fight each other. It's kinda messed up though that his reward for pulling even at 7-7 with his first ever win against Wakataka Kage was a fight with Onosato. That was just rude. Shodai. C- prediction, 6-9 record. He wasn't doing that badly, getting to 6-6 after 12 days, but unlike when he went to 10-5 a couple tournaments ago, this time he had to finish with Wakataka Kage, a streaking Midori Fuji, and a shockingly on-point Nishiki Fuji. If he'd beaten Midori Fuji, I think he would have had a much better chance to beat Nishiki Fuji because a winning record would still be in the cards. But you'll rarely go wrong betting on Shodai having a mental boom. Shona Naomi. B tier, 8-7 record. Got his 8th win on day 14 with a day to spare, and he even appeared to get whacked by his thyroid issues. I'm by no means an expert, but my understanding is the biggest problem this causes for an athlete tends to be a drop in energy levels, and the difference in his effort from the first few days to the second week was extremely noticeable. Unless he somehow sorts this out, and I don't even know if that's possible, he's gonna remain predictably unpredictable. Oshoma, C+ prediction, 8-7 record. Not actually a lot to say about Oshoma. He had a few nice wins, a loss to Ichi Yamamoto that was surprising given their head-to-head but not so much given how Ichi was fighting, and overall a generally solid tournament. He just did his thing. Sometimes that's enough. Kageaki, C- prediction, 6-9 record. I had him very low C-, and he lived down to those expectations. 0-4 start, 3-8 after 11 days, never had a real chance at a winning record. The win over Takano Sho at the end was nice, and I have no idea why he causes Hakuoho such problems, but overall this was a very Kageaki kind of basho. Midori Fuji, C- prediction, 7-8 record. A 7-8 score is pretty much what a C- prediction expects, but his road there was wild. Even if we knew his first 8 opponents ahead of time, it would have been mad to predict a 1-7 start. But that start got him a few fights against guys who were struggling, way down the ranks, or both, and got on a roll that landed him at 7-7 before Gonoyama put an end to his Kachikoshi dreams. This continues to bode poorly for his future, but at least he's sliding down the ranks as slowly as possible. We can put a bunch of the D tiers together next. Takano Sho. Starting 0-5 and finishing the Sanyaku run at 2-7 is pretty much how it looked like Takano's basho was gonna go. The poor record didn't even ease up his schedule. He pulled Takayasu on day 10, then fellow Joy wrestlers Atami Fuji, Tobizaru, and Gonoyama on 11 through 13. The fact he won all of those to reach 6-7 and have a shot at a Kachikoshi was remarkable. Getting stuck with Oho on day 14 was incredibly unlucky. The schedule shook out so that Oho, despite being in the middle of the Yusho race, either had to fight someone struggling above him, or maybe Tamawashi, who was doing pretty well at Maegashira 10. It can feel like having him fight someone with a winning record is the most reasonable option, but high-ranked guys are supposed to be there for a reason. Even if their record is poor, they're expected to still give opponents a good test. The scheduling committee went with Takano Sho, and that pretty much doomed his chances of a winning record. Losing to Kageaki on the last day was just kinda sad. Tama Shoho. The coffee shop manager's 6-9 finish was better than I expected, but also possibly close to a best-case scenario. He was never really in contention for a winning record, picking up his 8th loss on day 12. He also had wins over Mitake Yumi, who we discussed, and Churina Umi, who looked completely out of sorts even if he didn't look injured per se. He's fun to watch, and it's possible he stays in the division instead of Shirokuma coming up, but I think another trip to Juryo would be good for him. We've been seeing time and again that guys who jump to Makauchi and struggle still seem to learn something and apply that to find more success in Juryo than they had previously. I'd like to see that for him as well. Tobizaru and Toki Hayate. Both these guys finished 7-8. Usually, if someone finishes 7-8, I bump them to C- because they were at least close to a winning record. In these cases, I'm not sure that's warranted. Tobizaru started 5-2 in part thanks to the fact that Kotozakura and Teru were too busted up to beat him, but he still couldn't swing that into a winning record. Toki Hayate had his 3 best matchups of the tournament in the first 4 days, so he started 3-1, and then went into the expected tailspin once his opponents were higher ranked. Neither one was in a position to realistically get a winning record, and making their records look less bad at the end doesn't change that. Endo, C- prediction, 6-9 record. This poor guy got absolutely screwed at the end. He managed to reach 6-5, then got stuck with 4 of the toughest opponents he reasonably could have been scheduled against in the last 4 days. Pulling Wakamoto Haru at the end, who was struggling overall but pulling it together in the second week, was especially rough. Yeah, you get who you get, and something like this happens to someone pretty much every tournament, but that doesn't make it easier to deal with. Abi and Onokatsu. C+ predictions and 7-8 records for both. Abi was at 7-4 on day 11, and Onokatsu was 6-3 on day 9, so both were in very strong positions to secure winning records. In fact, I said Abi was C+ because he should beat most Maegashira opponents, so starting 4-1 on the back of 3 Sanyaku wins looked great. Even after a stunning loss to Takano Sho on day 7, he was the first guy to beat Kinbozan 3 days later. But he appeared to lose some steam physically, and it impacted him just as he had to face a decent version of Shodai, Takeru Fuji, Takayasu, and a very informed Daisho. Similarly, after a tough loss to Toki Hayate, Onokatsu's strong record served him up to Oho and Tamawashi. The last 2 days were against Meisei and Hiradoumi, and even though neither of them did great, they're always tough and still probably better than Onokatsu at this stage of his career. Relative to what they should be capable of, neither Onokatsu nor Abi got quite as screwed as Endo, I think, but they were also pretty unfortunate in how the end of the basho played out. Gonoyama, C- prediction, 8-7 record. One win was a Fusen over Terunofuji, which, keep that in your back pocket for trivia night. But he didn't even beat this busted-ass Kotozakura and still swung a winning record. Sure, Atami Fuji was also pretty terrible, but early on he earned his first win in several attempts against both Ura and Hiradoumi. I said ages ago that Gonoyama should be able to beat Ura regularly if he stops getting tricked, and the same applies to Hiradoumi. He's looked much steadier the last two bashos than in the past with respect to staying in control and on balance, so that might start being the case. If he could just stop getting dumpstered by every healthy Sanyaku wrestler he sees, maybe he could make some real noise. Now to talk about some guys who were initially in an injury tier. If you didn't see the tier list, basically, I put some guys in an injury tier based on what they should do if healthy, but this time I also added an effective tier based on what I viewed as a minimum expectation for this basho. Takayasu, A injury tier, effectively B, finished 8-7. So the effective tier was correct. I think Papa Bear probably needs to come out of injury tier, at least when he's not slated to fight many or any Sanyaku opponents. He didn't have any days this basho that looked worse than the others, so I think this is just who he is now. 8-7 is borderline, but that's with super hot Kirishima and Hakuoho as two of his last three opponents, as well as facing a Chiyoshima from another dimension early on and getting posterized by Ura. It was fine. Takayasu fans want more than fine, but that just doesn't seem likely anymore. Kirishima, A injury tier, effectively C+, finished 11-4. Anyone who's been watching for the last year or so knows Kiri's physical status is central to his effectiveness, but we never seem to have any useful information about it until after a competition ends. This time, he was clearly feeling good despite the rough start and contended all the way through day 14, so he lived up to what he's capable of. It'll be great for the sport if this Kiri is the one who shows up consistently, but we need more time to see if that'll be the case. Hiradoumi, B injury tier, effectively C+, 7-8 record. Like Takayasu, the effective tier was pretty much correct. He looked physically okay, and it would have been tough to predict a 1-4 start with the 5 guys he faced. But he turned it around, got above 500 with his first ever win over Hoshoryu, you know, the one that made us all think Nephew's rope dream was dead, but then suffered his first ever loss to Wakamoto Haru before having Hakuoho and Daisho dump him to 8 losses. It was a bit unlucky in terms of schedule, but more importantly for the future, it looks like more guys are starting to figure out what to do against him. For the moment, I suspect we'll probably see him bounce in and out of the Joy over the next year or so, but even that might become optimistic quickly. Nishikigi, C injury tier, effectively C+, 8-7 record. One win was the walkover after Kitanowaka's injury, but he would have been a favorite in that anyway. He looked decent, his only really questionable loss was to Tamashoho, and his rare win over Midori Fuji on day 2 doesn't even look that stunning given how Midori's basho went. This is roughly what his bashos at this level should look like when he's feeling fine. Kota Shoho, C injury tier, no clue what to expect. Turns out that even though he wasn't actively limping, he's still clearly not okay. I didn't include him with the more severely injured because he at least had some fight in him, but it was not pretty. He kinda started the Juryo springboard effect in late 2023, along with Ichi Yamamoto, so once he heals, maybe he'll do it again. Now for some predictions that were a little off the mark.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Hoshoryu, A prediction, 12-3 Yusho, move him to S tier. 10-12 wins was always a very reasonable expectation for Hoshoryu, so in terms of final record, this always seemed very plausible. He was 2 wins clear of Onosato, so obviously he was the best Ozeki, which is another reason to bump him to S tier. Sure, he benefited from Kotozakura's struggles, but so did a lot of people. He still had a hell of a tournament. The question now, regardless of his rank, is how consistently we'll get the Hoshoryu who flattened out the highest level guys in the sport versus the one who found a new way to lose to Atami Fuji and got dunked on by Hiradoumi at the worst possible moment. Presumably Kotozakura will get healthy, Hoshoryu's not gonna beat Onosato every time, and he won't avoid Sanyaku matchups because he gets to fight double-digit Maegashira contenders every time either. This was a combination of excellent performance and pretty good fortune, and now we get to see if he can up his game to account for times when the fortune isn't there. Takeru Fuji, S prediction, 10-5 finish, move to A tier. Takeru Fuji did good, nothing wrong with his performance. It's pretty clear his weakness is to large, powerful pushers. They're the only ones who can either work through his assault or hold him up long enough to hit a slapdown or pull him into a throw. Obviously, Hoshoryu and Kirishima aren't that big, but they're very good, so they'll always be problems for just about everyone. Takeru creates a different kind of problem for opponents in that his upper body strength is off the charts and he's still mobile, but the trade-off for him so far has been a relative lack of leg strength and balance. He's gonna have to do something about that, even if he continues to pull off winning records, because opponents will adapt to that weakness faster than he can become even stronger up top. Wakataka Kage, B prediction, 7-8 record, move to C tier. This is a bit of a frustrating miss because until the end of the Basho, none of his losses were surprising, at least with respect to how his opponents were performing at the time. Oho, Hoshoryu, Daisho, Kirishima, and Onosato were all monsters, and he caught Kotozakura at the end of Koto's comeback streak. So, at 7-6 and with a match against Ura on day 14, it looked like Waka was all set to at least maintain his Komusubi spot. Then, miracle of miracles, Ura beat him for the first time ever, and he followed that up with his second loss in 3 matches to Ichi Yamamoto. For the tournament as a whole, Waka didn't look quite as explosive as he had while rising back through the Maegashira ranks. However, he didn't seem that far off his game, and his knee wasn't taped up any more heavily than before. He'll likely be at Maegashira 1 East in March with a chance to jump right back into the Sanyaku, so it'll be worth a close look at how he's moving next Basho. Takara Fuji, C- prediction, 5-10 record, move to D tier. This is more of a technicality than anything. I said in the prediction that I was putting him at C- out of respect because I'd underrated him a bunch in the recent past, and because the mid-ranks looked relatively weak, but even 7 wins would have been surprising. 5-10 is pretty much what should happen to him at this level. Hakuoho, C+ prediction, 10-5 record, move to B tier. I said I struggled with where to place Hakuoho because he hasn't been the explosive yeet master he was in his first run as a Sekitori, so I picked what felt like a middle ground in his range of possibilities. For 6 days, that looked smart since he started 3-0 against lesser competition and dropped to 3-3 once tougher guys showed up. And if he'd fought some of his tougher opponents like Tobizaru or Hirodoumi early, maybe he'd have been less likely to win. But by the time they came up on the schedule, he had a pretty solid flow going, and a 7-2 finish while getting bumped further and further up the ranks looks great. He's winning some of these fights with pure power, and as he goes up, his technique's gonna have to start playing in. So far, so good though. Tamawashi, C- prediction, 9-6 record, move to B tier. I usually move guys who finish 9-6 just to C+, but Tamawashi was really smashing it this Basho. He completely blitzed Takeru Fuji, started 6-1, and the losing streak that spiraled him to 6-5, including 2 of the playoff contenders and Kirishima, who was in it all the way until Kinbozan beat him on day 14. 3 very solid wins got him to 9-5, at which point, I don't know, maybe he didn't see a victory over Kotoshoho as a good thing considering how far up he'd go in rank. Regardless, for a guy who's been hanging around this rank for over a year and surrounded by an unusually strong group of wrestlers for this part of the Banzuke, he did phenomenally well. Meisei, C+ prediction, 6-9 record, move to C-. This was a rough one for Meisei. To be totally frank, I saw that there were a lot of relatively tough guys just under him on the Banzuke, but I didn't really consider how difficult that would make things for him, especially if he struggled and wound up with good lower ranked opponents. He had 0 highly winnable fights until maybe Tamashoho on day 10. He does have a very good record against Shonen Umi, but Shonen Umi woke up by the time they fought on day 8, so even a win there wasn't going to come easy. He definitely benefited from a schedule downgrade due to his 2-7 start, so things balanced out a bit, but I needed to look more carefully at his likely opposition. If I had known his first 9 opponents, I wouldn't have expected a 2-7 start, but probably not a winning one either. Now we get to the disaster picks. There's way more of these than I'd like, but it's worth taking a closer look at why they were so wrong. Daisho, C+ prediction, 11-4 record, move to A tier. Daisho sometimes just does this, stonking out on everyone for a tournament before returning to his safe Kachikoshi ways. This was mostly off on the numbers as opposed to the awareness of what he might do, but I can't claim I would have ever expected him to only lose to opponents with 10 or more wins. Wakamoto Haru, B prediction, 6-9 record, move to C-. This was an atrocious tournament for Wakamoto Haru. He was so bad that he only had 2 Sanyaku opponents the whole tournament. The matches he would have had kept getting broken because the other Sanyaku wrestlers, even Kotozakura, could be put to more useful tasks. But what exactly happened? The short version is that Waka got his soul crushed by pushers throughout the tournament. 6 of his 9 losses were to opponents who predominantly win through pushing, and Takayasu is fairly balanced. Add in Shodai, who's beaten him 4 straight, and Kirishima, who's just good, and that accounts for every fight he dropped. The thing is, he's never appeared unusually vulnerable to that tactic. He still has a winning record against Gonoyama and Ichiyamamoto, and a dominant one against Oho. He struggled badly against Abi, but turned it around big time recently. And his 5 wins after that terrible start were all against relatively light guys willing to engage the belt, so his struggle was really with pushing wrestlers. He still didn't look great in those wins, so it does seem like he was injured in some fashion, but I have no idea what might be wrong. Nishiki Fuji, C- prediction, 9-6 record, move to C+. C- to C+ doesn't sound like much, but it was the absolute bottom of C-, so to me the gap between the prediction and the reality is pretty big. Now, after this performance, is Nishiki Fuji back for real? Maybe, but I wouldn't say yes just on the basis of this tournament. He started 4-5, including losses to Toki Hayate, Kitanawaka, and Kaio. He looked okay, but he usually looks okay. Being at the bottom rank, though, benefited him in that he was able to pull matchups against some struggling higher rank wrestlers and get on a roll. He secured 8 wins against a badly struggling Churanaumi, and at the end, he won against Mental Boom Shodai to finish off a very good record. I like his fights, so I'd be happy if he was fighting fit again, but I'm not willing to believe he is just yet. Churanaumi, C+ prediction, 4-11 record, serious D tier. I blew his prediction for a similar reason to Meisei's, not properly accounting for the strength of his likely opposition. One thing I probably would have gotten wrong regardless was the fact he fought down in rank much more than up. Usually that would be a good thing, but in this case the competition just got harder, and I don't think I would have expected it to be as bad as it got. That being said, he looked pretty trash the whole tournament. At first I put that more on his opponents, but eventually I realized that the style that clicked for him as he went up wasn't clicking anymore. He was surprisingly effective in the past at just jamming his face into dudes, similar to Hirota-Umi. But, just like Hirota-Umi, if it becomes even a little less effective, the wins can stop coming in a hurry. I knew I was being a little optimistic at C+, but I would have put his floor for wins at 6. 4-11 is a disaster. Atami Fuji, C+ prediction, 5-10 record, move him to D tier. So much for turning that corner, huh? I said he'd get blitzed early, which is exactly what happened. After he fought Onosato, he was 2-5, but he'd beaten Hoshoryu again, none of the other losses were surprises, and he was done with the Sanyaku. Starting poorly and making up for it later is what Atami does. This time though, Oho usually beats him and was absolutely flying, so that loss was expected. And it's hard to win every other fight, but to lose to Gonoyama, Endo, and Takano Sho in the same 5-match span as Onosato and Oho? 2-9? Good gods. To make it worse, it didn't seem like he was on the verge of victory a bunch of times and just not finishing the job. He was not as effective as he's been in the past. Even Tobizaru beat him, and Tobi's usually a free win. Just to reach 5 wins, he had to get Mitakeumi and Churanaumi as opponents the last 2 days, possibly the 2 guys who looked in worse physical shape than he did. I know about the hip arthritis, but I've seen nothing to indicate the extent of the problem, so it's the kind of issue that could, theoretically, not have a substantial impact on him for years. After this basho though, I don't know. It would be foolish to assume he'll fall apart now, and I suspect he'll do pretty well in March now that he'll finally have a basho without the top guys beating his ass right off the bat, but this is going to be something to pay attention to. Kinbozan and Oho. Kinbozan C+ prediction, Oho C-. Both finish 12-3, both get moved to S tier, and anyone who says they predicted this from either guy is full of shit. I at least expected Kinbozan to do pretty well, with the only question mark being if he was fully recovered from the neck injury and possible other issues that led to him sliding out of the division just 4 months ago. Looking at his 9-0 start, apart from Takerufuji at the end of that, none of those wins are especially surprising. But the competition level there isn't that far below the guys he was getting stomped by in July and September of last year when he was 4-11 twice. If you think about the Kinbozan who made it to Makuuchi a couple years ago, you'd probably call him a favorite against at least his first 7 opponents here. But whether through poor tactics, poor health, both, or something else, he consistently failed to get those wins in the past, even down around these ranks. To expect he'd suddenly do it this time would have been, at best, wildly optimistic. Of course, there have been wrestlers with this type of start who got shell-shocked once the Sanyaku came calling. Midori Fuji's 10-0 start a couple years ago that ended 10-5 is the best example, but there are plenty of others. So the fact Kinbo Slice beat Ono Sato and Kirishima to finish 3-3 after his schedule got upgraded was pretty good. But we also saw against Oho, with the Yusho there for the taking, and against Hoshoryu twice, that he's not on that level yet. Especially against Oho, he fought very well and lost to the legitimately better guy. He really did all he could. So applaud his performance, but if he jumps back to Maegashira 5, don't expect a repeat. And speaking of Oho, when did you ever expect him to be called the legitimately better guy in a Yusho clinching match? A 6-0 start against 5 Sanyaku opponents and Tobizaru was baffling, not because he never seemed capable of it, but because he always seems theoretically capable and never actually does it. It's his longest winning streak to start a Makuuchi Basho at any rank, not just way up in the nosebleeds, and in the 3 other tournaments where he started with Sanyaku opposition, he began 1-3 every time. And not only did he start blazing hot, losing to the top 2 Ozeki to drop to 6-2 probably helped him, since his schedule the rest of the way was not as tough as Kirishima's. I'm not trying to dump on his achievement by saying that. He still has to beat the guys they put in front of him, and he was obviously fighting on another level this whole tournament. But, as is usually the case in these situations, it's premature to assume he's ascended to a new plane of consistency. Even if his improvements are a consistent part of his game now, his opponents will now have a chance to adapt to them. Getting to a high level requires improvement, but remaining at that level requires staying ahead of the curve as well. He's always had the talent. Once again, we wait to see if he can stick at this new level he's shown. Ichi Yamamoto, D prediction, move to C+. Unbelievably, Ichi Yamamoto making me look like an idiot flew under the radar because of Chiyoshoma making me look like a bigger idiot, but let's give Ichi his flowers real quick. His only loss in the first 5 days was to Chiyo, and even though he somewhat came back to earth after that, winning 2 of 3 Sanyaku matches near the end when he really shouldn't have had any was a great finish. Most of his losses came to guys he rarely, if ever, beats. Nothing this Basho was easy, and he fought through it to get his Kachikoshi. Very well done. And Chiyoshoma, D prediction, 9-6 record, move him to B tier. This move to B tier isn't to put a stamp on how badly I missed. It's earned. This dude had his 8th win on day 9. That's bananas. His first 5 wins were against guys he still has losing records against even after beating them. Yeah, he got a Fusen against Roga, and Mitakeumi and Churinaumi were breaking down at the time of those matches, but almost everyone with a good record has wins like that. He was absolutely blazing until Kirishima and the real Sanyaku Smashers got him. Even then, once he escaped contender hell into a match with Shona Naomi on day 15, he won that too. This guy, who spent 4 tournaments in Juryo, escaped only to need hernia surgery and fell back in, who hasn't been at this rank in 3 years, who has never had more than 5 wins at this rank or higher in his career. This guy went 9-1 against opponents he faced outside of his upgraded contender schedule. That must have been some kind of hernia surgery because holy hell, what a performance. Of course, we saw what happened against the Sanyaku, so he's gonna be ultra D tier at Maegashira 2 in March, but this was still a fun ride. Okay, that's the recap for Hatsu 2025. Like I said at the start, I'm gonna make a video about how a Yokozuna promotion happens, along with the details of what's usually required and where Hoshoryu fits into all of that. So keep an eye out for that. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.